I think it's safe to say that of all the guests we've had on the podcast so far, we've never had another author who has so many of their characters being eviscerated.
Hello, welcome to Beneath the Page, the podcast about books and the writers behind them. I'm Sophie Beal.
And I'm Steve Couch. And we're joined today by Andrew Shanahan, who is an award-winning journalist. He is the author of 3 novels and 2 collections of short stories. He's also the reason why I spend every Friday evening in a subterranean room with no natural daylight weighing fat men. But we'll explain why that's the case later on. So anyway, Andrew, I think it's safe to say that of all the guests we've had on the podcast so far, we've never had another author who has so many of their characters who he describes as being eviscerated. Despite that, I wouldn't describe the books as being horror particularly. I wouldn't describe them as being slasher fiction or anything as bloody as that statement sounds. So how would you describe them? Is there a particular genre that your books sit in?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me on. It's great to be here and to talk about the books and to talk generally. And apologies for you having to be in a subterranean bunker every Friday, Steve. No, that's a really tough question, in truth, about the genre of my books. And you're absolutely right. I do eviscerate characters an awful lot. I agree. I don't necessarily think that what I write is horror. I always think that I'm a disappointing author from that side of things. Like, nominally, I'm a sci-fi, dystopian, post-apocalyptic author in the sense that most of my books have something to do with the end of the world or a calamity of some description. Increasingly, with things like Beer of the Bang, the post-apocalyptic elements of it are backgrounded. They are to talk about something else. And I suppose the same is true of Before and After, in that the dystopia and the post-apocalyptic elements are perhaps more to do with a form of satire and a form of commentary about other issues. Even more complicated, that the next book that I've got coming out is a young adult book. So okay. I'm losing sleep currently about what happens if they really enjoy the young adult book and then go on to read my other books and start asking their parents about evisceration.
Are you throwing any evisceration into the young adult book?
Do you know what? I will tell you that the first line, yes, there is an explosion. So I'm probably going to psychologically scar an entire generation of young people as well. So I can only apologise and say that it's just what comes naturally.
I think that's a laudable thing to aim for.
Yeah, it's just you expressing yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. It's creativity in action.
What's the appeal of dystopia?
Wow, these are tough questions already. Broadly, what is the appeal of dystopia? I think for me, the themes around post-apocalyptic writing are that it's so easy to use when the world has gone wrong to look at what's going wrong currently and what we have at this point as well. And although, I said I struggle to say what sort of genre I am, my real belief and my real hope is that I am a writer who writes about hope. And yes. I think that in all my books, what I try and do is point people towards different sources of hope and why I believe that there are reasons to hope. So I think that when you look at dystopia, what's so fun is that you can write about the horror and you can write about the devastation and you can write about zombies and you can write about, the difficulties of a post-apocalyptic life. But I think in doing that, you're also talking about what's good about what we have now.
I heard a fantasy author saying one time, the point about stories with dragons isn't that there are dragons in the world, it's that dragons can be defeated.
Absolutely. And I mean, you look at all the authors who are trying to do something interesting within a genre, that they are talking about wider issues. So the one that instantly springs to mind is Carrie, Stephen King's Carrie. It's not a horror about, telekinetic powers. It's a story about puberty and about growth and about the sort of the horror of the body revealing itself through that particular age. There's all those sorts of, you want to be writing about those. It's kind of a bit cheesy when you and I think you can tell when an author has said, I'm going to put the theme first and this is the most important part, and it just sounds like a lecture with a sprinkling of dragons. What you want is that the theme arises often a little bit to the author's surprise, and then there's a greater chance of readers being able to interpret that in the way that they want to. So, for example, before and after, I've had a number of people say, "Oh, so you were writing this about men and loneliness." Obviously, I was like, I didn't think I was, but yes, I could definitely see how that would fit. And ultimately, if you've taken something of value out of that, and then I'm a firm believer that for authors, especially when you've written the book, it's up to other people to interpret and to see what they think the book is about. Because I've got my view, and that's important to me, but it's not the only view.
Again, does Beal of the Bang have an origin story?
Post 9/11, I'd heard about these extraction companies that started up. And what they were is that they were targeting ultra high net worth individuals. And they were effectively providing the service that Beal of the Bang do in the book, Beal of the Bang.
Can you give a very brief sum up the situation in the book?
Absolutely. So in the book, what happens is that one of these extraction companies called Beal of the Bang that support ultra high net worth individuals to get out of places when bad things happen. So, for example, during 9/11, they would go in and they would be providing boats on the Hudson River or, helicopter extractions. And these services do exist. And I'd heard about them. And I think the reason, go back to what you were asking, Sophie, about the origin of this, is that it struck me that there was a really interesting situation that could arise in those situations where this organization sent an alert to their customers to say that there is a bad thing happening. So in Beal of the Bang, that is the fact that all of the ultra high net worth individuals, the billionaires, the people in royalty, get a notification that there are a number of nuclear missiles heading towards London, and that those people have a very short period of time to get out of London to where Beal of the Bang will extract them from London. The only problem is that it's a mistake, and they don't actually, the missiles don't exist. And so you ended up, and the reason that I wanted to write about this was that I don't think this was me putting the theme first. I think that what I was doing was, it was a sort of an unfairness that I felt existed within society, and something that I thought was horrific was the existence of billionaires. I think that by any measure of a society, for some people to have so much and for some people to have so little, I wouldn't say I was a communist and that everything should be distributed equally, but I think at the same time it had become so glaringly wrong that I wanted a way to talk about that. And this situation struck me as an amusing thing where you would have one group of people who were behaving as if it was the end of the world, and therefore all normal rules no longer applied. And you would have a much larger group of people, i.e. the people who weren't members of Beal of the Bang, who would be reacting to those people who are potentially, so for example, if you knew that you only had 60 minutes to get out of London and there was huge amounts of traffic, for example, you probably wouldn't mind about driving through pedestrianised areas or, behaving in a way that would otherwise be totally... one of the characters, Bradford, says at some point that he could get used to this idea that there is no tomorrow, because it suddenly allows him to behave in this kind of monstrous way that potentially has always been part of him. But yeah, so that was the origin of it. It was wanting to talk about inequality and wanting to do so in an entertaining way.
And one of the things I enjoyed about Beal of the Bang was the very different way that different people reacted. There's people from all elements of society behaving badly, and all elements of society behaving well, and you never quite know which way they're going to come. Though Bradford was particularly vile, I thought.
Yeah, he was really fun to write. And yeah, you're right. It was, I'd always been very wary about writing a multi-viewpoint book because, for one thing, I'm not 100% sure that readers particularly like them because, I know that things like Game of Thrones are obviously multi-viewpoint books and they seem to have done okay. But I think that there is a natural tendency to want to see one narrative through to the end. And obviously what I was trying to do was tell one narrative, but the wider point is that it's a narrative about this event rather than the individuals involved. So it does use several viewpoints to give a wider scope of the story. And so because that was the case, I really wanted to look at every strata of society from, monarchy and billionaires down to people who work in sewers, with no disrespect to people who work in sewers.
I've got the book here.
Yes. What a handsome book it is.
It is. It's a really good cover. Your first quote is, "I don't start running on the bang of the starter's pistol. I start on the B of the bang." And that's by Linford Christie. And you can immediately see the link. But then you quote the Bible, "Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days." What made you choose that one?
Because I think it was the most apocalyptic thing I could think of that was relevant to this situation. And also, I love how clear the Bible is on this particular topic. Yeah. It's really clear that, I don't think that the Bible gives a communist perspective that we should share everything. I don't think it does that, but I think it does. It's very instructive in terms of us not hoarding wealth to such great extents. And I think that's an important message. There is a very real chance that we are in a sort of, it is gathering momentum rather than going to stop. So I think that they've said that by 2030 we should have the world's first trillionaire. And, I think it's one of those things that's become part of society and part of our modern world that sometimes you can become inured to, and you can sort of sit there and think, okay, well, that's just the way of things. But it needn't be, and it shouldn't be, because it's so obviously wrong. Genuinely, I think that it is. If you zoom out a little bit, you can see that it is a really viciously wrong thing.
The customers of Be of the Bang, when the alarm goes off, get to open up a briefcase, and among other things in the briefcase is a little bag full of gold coins. I found it fascinating how the different characters react to the bag of gold coins and the part those bags played as the story unfolds.
The idea that they had this tangible bag of gold, and that in many cases that becomes something that affects the plot, was really, because once you take someone away from, say, for example, the digital wealth that they have. So if you can no longer log on to your bank, how do you say that someone is rich because they don't actually have that bag of gold? I did want them to have some tangible asset that made them feel rich, because also from a practical point of view, what can you carry with you that gives you that little bit of an edge over the other people? It might be useful, for example, to bribe people, to pay people off, all sorts of things that gold could actually help with.
You've got the super rich, you've got cynical politicians, and cynical politicians' wives, in one instance. You've got the corporate media and the influence they have on shaping opinion. And you've got just good old-fashioned ego and selfishness right across the social strata. Which of those strands was the most fun for you to write?
The one that I probably felt my most out of depth with was the strand about the royals, because I think it's so easy with the royals to go into just this sort of lampooning and just make everything cartoonish. And I didn't want to do that. So Eulalia, or Lally, who is, a kind of minor royal, essentially, like 11th in line to the throne. And when this situation happens and Bee of the Bang alert all their customers, the major royals are evacuated to the Isle of Man. And she's not. And so she suddenly loses all this position and kind of has to come to terms with who she is as a person rather than who she is as part of a powerful family. This situation holds a mirror up to her about where she is with herself. And I really enjoyed that in the end, partly because of the challenge of doing it.
When you introduced her, I thought I knew, oh yeah, I know this type of character. I can see where this is. And I was surprised at the depth that came out of her and where you took that. So I enjoyed that.
Oh, great.
Very
well,
much.
I'm pleased about that. I think that, like I say, I was just trying desperately not to make her just a buffoon or a stereotype. I did want to try and tell a bit of a human story with her. And as we've said, I do enjoy eviscerating people. So it was really fun to write Bradford and just give him the worst possible days.
And right from the word go, you set him up as a ridiculous figure for the audience, not least because he's Bradford, whatever, the 9th, but the family has got the Roman numerals wrong. Talking about the positive side, a particular favourite character of mine in the book was Margaret. And I know what you're saying about multi-character books, and sometimes if I'm reading a book like that, you get that sinking feeling when a certain character, oh, it's them again. Margaret was the opposite. For me, every time I thought there was a new chapter that was focusing on Margaret, I had that little moment of, oh, good. Where does she come from and what does she represent in the book?
So in the book, Margaret is the secretary of one of the billionaires, and he's a slightly more humane billionaire. So I interviewed probably about 6 or 7 actual billionaires for the book. Yeah. And it was fascinating.
How did you get access to them?
I posted a lot on social media, on my social media, asking, does anyone know any ultra high net worth individuals? I then spoke to someone who did financial planning for ultra high net worth individuals, and he effectively opened the door to 3 or 4 of those.
The proportion of nice guys to not so nice guys in the book, does that mirror what you found with your interviews?
Yeah, that's good. They were all pretty generous with their time, but I tell you one thing that I asked all of them was that there's a cliche around, so if you threw a net over 100 billionaires, you would get more psychopaths than you would if you threw a net over 100 members of the general public. And I asked all of them, one, if they thought that was true, do you think that there are more psychopaths who are billionaires? And 2, if so, why? And the first question, all of them said, yes, there are more psychopaths who are billionaires. They said, and they were emphatic about it, all of them. It was 100% of the people I interviewed said, yes, definitely, there are more psychopaths who are billionaires. And one of them gave a really good answer, which was that it's almost a natural consequence of having that much money that you become psychopathic, because what he was saying is that there is no gap between want and get. And so if you want to be in Paris eating at the restaurant at the top of the Eiffel Tower, you go and get on a plane and you fly there and then you're there. And his view was that is not a healthy thing for a human mind to experience on a sustained basis.
Yeah.
Because we all look at that and we go, wow, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? You wouldn't even have to queue at an airport. You would just get onto your private jet and then you would be, drinking a glass of champagne while you're whisked off to the temples in Machu Picchu or something. But that, over a sustained period of time, causes you to lose empathy with real life, because you don't have that thing of, wow, we're going to go to Machu Picchu in 3 years and we're going to save up for it and it's going to be amazing. And that raising delayed gratification seemingly is a recipe for creating psychopaths. So that was a really interesting experience. I think, where did Margaret come from was the question you asked earlier. And I think she obviously works for a billionaire, and he is offered this place in the bunker, but decides not to because he can't leave his children and his wife. And he is a human being who react in a human way. And he gives his pouch of gold to Margaret and says it's something to the effect of, this is far too little, far too late. I realise now I should have given more. And so Margaret is left with this bag of money. And I think she reacts probably the way that I would react she's the closest to what I would do in that situation. And it's a fun thing, if you then found out, and this billionaire, the slightly more humane one, actually kind of semi-announces what's going on. So there is a wider public understanding of this incoming threat. Yeah, I was going to say that I think it's an interesting conversation to have around this book. Who would you react the most like?
I would hope I would react like Margaret. But,
yeah.
It's one of those, until you're there, you don't know.
You just don't know. Yeah, absolutely. And so Margaret's reaction is essentially, I better get the cats in. And so she phones home and puts the cat flap on so that she knows that the cats aren't going to be out and exploded by a nuclear bomb, because obviously that would be bad.
But there's more to it than that. I mean, she also goes out of her way to be helping other people, in particular other people that she's got no prior connection to, rather than focusing on her own needs. And that I thought was what was so powerful about her.
It's almost sort of like a parable style element to her story, in the fact that she has a very limited number of these gold coins and she gives them to people at different points through the story. And so Margaret is probably the most overt link to a Christian element in this story, in that she is a practicing Christian. She's a member at Southwark Cathedral, and she tries to reflect goodness out to other people, but she also experiences goodness herself, in the sense that her boss gives her this money for her, but she then redistributes it, because effectively she sort of thinks, well, what good's money at this point? And because I'm a bit weird, there's also a sort of slightly unusual sex element to her story, in the sense that she's in a sort of a platonic, but it's kind of an unrequited love situation with her lodgers, and she finally gets up the courage to ask why it's platonic, because it's just one of those things that's never been raised and never been discussed.
So if you told me at the beginning of the year that I would be reading a book about a zombie apocalypse, and for a large portion of the time the main character Ben would only be talking to his dog, and I would have finished the book and enjoyed it by the end, I wouldn't have believed you.